Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Charles Shapiro, President of World Affairs Council, and I bet you know that or you wouldn't be on this Zoom. Our guest today is Jim Reed, who's the President of YKK Corporation of America. Our podcast today, and it's not a podcast yet, but it will be in about 45 minutes. Our Zoomcast is brought to you by the UPS Foundation and the Atlanta Global Studies Center. Just to keep everything neat and cool, please use the chat function to send questions. And if you send them to Fernanda Lucchine, she will edit them, shorten them, and then forward them on to me. And if you're angry at Jim or me for some reason and have real strong views, she's going to edit you out. So please, hope you're not angry. Jim, welcome. I'm going to brief introduction. Jim's been the president of YKK America since May of 2017. YKK has 3 operating companies in the US, plus 5 in Canada, Mexico, El Salvador, Honduras, and Colombia. Jim is from Kentucky, attended the University of Virginia, undergrad, law school at the University of Georgia, practiced law at Troutman Sanders, and you're going to hear this, I'm sure he was an exchange student in Japan when he was an undergrad, and that sort of set him on the track to end up at YKK. Right. And what is not in his bio, but y'all need to know, is that he's a triathlete, right?
That's right, absolutely.
Good, and it looks like you're not missing your barber.
No, I fired my barber almost 25 years ago. And I've been working on doing my own thing. So yeah, I'm the one, it's one of the things I don't understand, this whole hair cutting thing. My daughter cut my son's hair over the weekend. He looks great. She did a great job. So yeah, that's the most hair cutting we've had at our house so far.
Good. And just so everybody knows, YKK is a corporate member of the World Affairs Council. So yeah. Okay, so Jim, first of all, so everybody knows, what's the short version? Who is YKK? What is YKK? What does YKK stand for?
Okay. YKK stands for Yoshida Kogyo Kabashiki Kaisha, of course.
Of course.
And I always say we can't fit that on a zipper pull, so we made it YKK. It is a global company. We are in, we've got over 100 companies around the world, 72 countries and regions around the world, right around $7.5 billion revenue company, 47,000 employees. And we make zippers. We make a lot of zippers. We make other things too. We make snaps and buttons. And a lot of people don't, well, maybe they do know this, but we make architectural products. So the next time you go to Chick-fil-A, I don't know, next time you'll step into a Chick-fil-A or go into a bank, if you see in the corner of the door, you'll often see the YKK AP symbol. And we make those in Dublin, Georgia. We do a lot of architectural products, a lot of cool projects. The Georgia State Law School is one, the exterior aluminum. We make the aluminum profile for that, and that's YKK AP. We've been in Georgia for a long time. Marietta is the headquarters for the North and Central America region. So YKK is a Japanese company headquartered in Tokyo. But we have 6 regions around the world, and the North and Central America region where I work is headquartered in Marietta, Georgia. Down the road, a couple hours away in Macon, we've got 2.5 million square feet of manufacturing space, and we make a lot of different things there. And it's in 250 acres down there. Go down the road a little bit, another 45 minutes, you'll get to Dublin. We've got another 1 million square feet down there, another 1,000 people down there working. And we've got operations in Kentucky, manufacturing operations in Kentucky, Alabama, California, sales offices everywhere. So that's kind of the breadth of what we do. We've been in Georgia since 1973, first Japanese company, and we were brought here in part because of our founder's relationship with President Jimmy Carter, or then Governor Jimmy Carter.
Then Governor. Okay, so there, we've got a what I hope is once in 100 years pandemic, multiplied by what I hope is once in 100 years economic recession. And you add them together.
Don't forget about the oil shock, right? That kind of got lost in the news headlines, but we're looking at two black swans this year.
Yeah, exactly so. Exactly so. With oil prices below zero on the futures market for about a week, back up over 30 now. So how have these impacted YKK America? I mean, are you at normal operation turning out zippers and aluminum architectural products?
Yeah, no. Yeah, no. So we still manufacture a lot of zippers for apparel, and we export those around. So when retail stores are closed, that of course stops that pretty much dead in its tracks. And we also supply a lot of fasteners for the automotive industry. And unfortunately, that's been heavily impacted. So they had some shutdowns there, and that slowed us down there. We are also heavily invested in safety wear. So this, we call it workwear. And believe it or not, that's really impacted by how much oil is being pumped out. So when the oil industry shut down, we kind of got a triple threat there with apparel, automotive, and the oil industry hitting some of our hottest sectors in the region. So it was pretty devastating. We have been in the PPE industry for a long time. I guess now that's a pretty common acronym, personal protective equipment. We've been providing subcomponents for those folks and for government. And so we have remained in the United States an essential business. And so we have remained in operations, although much smaller and slower operation because we're not fully operating.
Okay, so as a global company, I mean, you've got operations in China, and I know back in January, y'all were buying N95 masks and shipping them to China. So
that's correct.
Obviously, you knew early on that something real bad was happening in China. Okay, yes. So you're the leader of the president of YKK America. You know, you pull out the crisis action plan. What happens?
So I was there. I was in Japan in January, and my global chairman, who I knew was one of the smartest people I'd ever met. You know, first thing he came up to me and he said, "This is bad. This is really bad. This could be worse than the Lehman shock. We call it Lehman shock in Japanese. It's a Japanese word. Lehman shock could be worse than the Lehman shock. I talk about the financial crisis." And so we talked about it a little bit more than I thought about it. And my assumption was that he was over exaggerating the impact. And then when I got back to the United States, it seemed very clear that the rest of American business was underestimating the impact. So he was right, I was wrong, and American business was wrong. But I think that maybe that warning gave us a little bit, we were able to react a little bit sooner, but still not soon enough. I mean, didn't anticipate the extent or the depth of the impact at all. But yes, we have a crisis action plan. So we have like a playbook. And it really what it is, you can't really list crises and say, okay, if there's a 5.4 earthquake or 7.8 earthquake or, you know, this level hurricane or this type of tornado, then do this. You can't do that because you run out of room. So instead, what you do is you create just a structure. And so we just had a structure where if something bad happens, you form teams of people with expertise in different areas that would be impacted in whatever area you are. So you trigger these different teams, and then they get to work in a cooperative way, and then they provide very quick and timely updates to a crisis management team. When I say quick, I'm saying 5 minutes a day, you know, in a consistent way. And so it's all just really a structure, and we were able to break that open and move that forward and get that going pretty fast. So that was helpful, very, very helpful to help us move in a consistent way, you know, because we're operating, you know, in 10 different countries around the region, and we want to coordinate also with what's going on around the world.
So is headquarters in Tokyo sending you and, you know, the red flags up y'all be careful, or this is, Jim, hey, you better figure out what's going on?
I think the global headquarters was extremely intelligent with how they handled it. Because if global headquarters had said, this is how we want you to handle it, it would have been a mistake. To a large extent, you have to let the smaller groups manage themselves. The most important thing I got, the most important help I got from global management was, hey, there's nothing you can do right now to save our year, the fiscal year. So take care of the employees as best you can. That was it.
That's great advice. So how'd you do that? Okay, so let's talk about leadership in the time of COVID. And I got to back up a little bit. YKK, if you go to your website, all over it, it says the cycle of goodness. Our corporate philosophy is the cycle of goodness. And then YKK America has got your 25 behaviors. Please don't list them here. We'll all fall asleep. But anyhow.
But under company rules, I do have to read this week's fundamental behavior, but I'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah. Okay. So how does a Japanese company that's still a privately held company, if I'm not mistaken, respond differently than a European or North American company, and particularly than a publicly held company would respond?
I mean, I can't necessarily compare those, that like one is better than the other, but I think there is a recognition that you're going to operate at a loss for a period of time. And that perhaps one of the benefits we have that I've been told publicly held companies don't have is the ability to look 3, 4, 10 years out as opposed to the next quarter. And of course that drives your decision making drastically, right? If you've got to manage what the metrics are to drive your stock price, and that's everything that matters for you in that quarter. From our perspective, we need to be looking at, you can't just dismantle your organization and expect to build it back up again in no time. So you make an investment in that. But at the same time, it's not a charity. We're a business that has to run as a business. So, we do a lot of the same things everybody else does. How do we preserve cash? What can we do? What was our investment plan? How do you so you have to re-look at everything. We run on a fiscal year, started April 1. And so it's really pretty much set by January. Well, that got thrown out in February. So all of the plans had to be looked at again under kind of an emergency situation. And then, with the whole effort to preserve cash as much as possible. And then we did that. But one of the things is, you referenced the cycle of goodness. Our founder, Mr. Yoshida, came up with this. The cycle of goodness is that no one prospers without rendering benefit to others. And after much study, there's multiple volumes on his speeches and articles about what that means, because it takes a lot to kind of figure out, okay, what does that mean? If you're a business and you have to generate a profit. And what you figure out is that you have 3 stakeholders. You have employees, you have customers, and you have your community. Those are your 3 stakeholders. Now, interestingly, your shareholders are not in that list.
Yeah, that was my question. So who's the community when you say community?
So it's the town around your factory. It's or the broader community in which you operate. The corporation is a citizen of that community and has an obligation to that community. Jobs is a big part of that. Environment's a huge part of that. Right? How do you protect the environment around your community? So, a little while ago, I don't know if we've talked about this, but Jamie Dimon's Business Roundtable came up with the notion, this revolutionary notion that businesses are not solely there to make shareholders rich, to some extent had been a philosophy that many businesses had followed. That's the duty of a corporation to benefit their shareholders. And the Business Roundtable came out with a statement saying, no, we're not that. A corporation has a broader mandate. And we've been there since 1934. We've understood that we have a broader mandate. And we think that's just part of the business model, because we think you'll actually be able to survive the troughs better when you invest in those stakeholders. So hopefully that'll work now. It'll certainly be put to the test.
So how do you take that? How do you take a philosophy and turn that into actions at the factory that's producing zippers and the factory that's producing architectural products?
You first, well, that drives you to quality, one. So that's good, right? So right there, right? Because if you're going to, if your customer is a stakeholder, you've got to have that quality. If your employee is a stakeholder, you need to invest in their long-term career. So you translate that into, how can I stay operational and have this employee stay with me for their entire work career. So you're driven towards quality, so that drives you towards the high end of everything that you do. And you're investing more into long term. The fundamental behaviors has been very helpful for us, because the philosophy can be kind of broad. What does it mean? And so we switched a few years ago with David Friedman. We developed the 25 fundamental behaviors. So you talk about, this is our little pamphlet I'm showing here on the screen, and it opens up through 1 through 25. And while we kind of knew this for many decades before, this exercise has really helped us kind of put it into practice. And each week we pick on a fundamental behavior, and this week's is be a lifelong learner. And it says, be curious, seek out, and take advantage of every opportunity to gain more knowledge, to increase your skills, and to become a greater expert. Be resourceful about learning and sharing best practices, never stop growing. And so we talk about that in every meeting that we have. Before we start every meeting, we say, what does that mean? And somebody will write something up, and we share this with our customers, and we share this with the community. And in fact, our employees share this with their families. And we talk about it all week, and the next week we'll talk about the next one. And what that does, it keeps it top of mind. And so your decision making is always impacted by what you've been reading recently, not just what a philosophy is, but what your behavior should do, right? So you want to talk about your behavior. How should you act? Not necessarily what you should be thinking about. And so when you are in a situation where perhaps you may not be acting in the best interest of your shareholders, or of your stakeholders, your employees, your community, or your customers, it shows up, and you're like, oh, wait a second, we're not really operating there. So the question is, when everything gets thrown out, when the economy gets blown up and everything stops, it actually becomes a lot simpler. Right? Because if you're in a robust economy, and let's say you're growing, and we're a manufacturer, let's say we grow at 6 or 7% a year. For a manufacturer of our maturity, that's a pretty big jump, right? You feel like you're successful. But the economy just grew significantly higher than that. Well, maybe you're not taking advantage of all the things you should take advantage of. And that becomes actually more complicated. When things kind of collapse, the only thing you got to drop back on are your ethics and your principles and your how do you want to act? Because there's really nothing from a lever pulling perspective. Should we expand 10,000 feet over here? Should we add another few machines here? There's none of those things come to mind can save you anymore. So you're kind of left with the bigger principles that you rely on.
Okay, so what happens to employees when demand falls off the edge of the cliff? How are you managing that at the two factories?
So, well, we've got within the United States, we have had furloughs and layoffs, but that's in line. But that's been heavily discussed and debated, because we also have this enhanced unemployment benefits. So our employees can be made whole in the United States through July on that. So we have laid off, I think, around 200 people in the United States, because you can't.
Stop a minute. 200 out of 200 out of how many?
In the United States, 1,600.
Okay.
So we're essential industry, remember? So early on in the pandemic, one of your issues is, how do I get people to show up for work?
Mm-hmm.
You're not just noticing how do I keep everybody's job? It's like, but how does everybody get to show up for work? And so we were never in that situation before. So your first decision is, okay, we're an essential industry. We're going to hurry up and figure out hygiene rules, social distancing rules. But if you guys are not feeling comfortable, you don't have to come. That's the first choice you make. Mm-hmm. And then you have to communicate like constantly, multiple times a day, on these Zoom calls, broadcasts, on the video screen, in person, explaining what you're doing, explaining what steps you're taking to try to keep people safe, shooting videos of what your industrial hygiene practices are, so that people feel comfortable actually coming to work, so that you can make the components that need to be made. I mean, if you think about the stuff that we make, that goes into face shields, that goes into masks, that goes into surgical gowns, that stuff goes into isolation chambers for folks that need to be, with the serious COVID-19 patients that the virus needs to be contained within their area. Those tents, hospitals you see in Central Park, those are made with our zippers. So our stuff still has to get out there. And so we had to keep those people going. In Canada, the Canadian government actually did an enhanced unemployment benefits structure to in effect stop the apparel industry, to keep people isolated. And the apparel industry took advantage of that. And in Canada, we did lay off 45 people of the 150 people, but they're still getting their unemployment benefits. So mm-hmm. It's in part because you're slower, but also in part because you need to keep people distant. You don't want your factory to become a hotspot. In Mexico, they've shut us down completely. They've shut everybody down. And we're continuing to pay full salary in Mexico. Now, I know that last month, a couple of auto workers negotiating with their unions agreed to 50% pay cut for employees who weren't showing up for work. We chose not to. Again, part of that decision-making process, right? What does a month's worth of 50% of pay cost the company? And what would that cost a typical Mexican manufacturing employee if their wages were cut in half? Well, what's the relative impact of that cost, right?
So what percentage of the workers you want to come to work are staying away because they feel uncomfortable, or is that down to zero?
Very, very few. Very, very few. So we had a few early on, and that was, reasonable, because everybody's confused and scared, and what causes, should we wear masks? Should we not wear masks? There's all sorts of confusion, right? But as we have gotten better at our industrial hygiene practices, we had those concerns dropped off significantly. And we were very proactive in communicating to our employees steps that we're taking and steps we want them to take. And so, they stand 6 feet apart when they show up for work, and they have their temperature taken before they clock in. We have hand washing, we have masks, we have misting, where we do a disinfecting misting. We have a number of different practices that we engage in to make sure that YKK is not a center of spreading COVID-19. But now, no, people who need to be there in the manufacturing space are there now. One of the hardening things about that is that in our California operations, we've got a lot of employees who've been with us for many decades. And I don't know if you recall, but Gavin Newsom declared the California lockdown at midnight on like a Sunday, and I go to bed at 10. for some reason I was up. I don't remember why, but I'm sitting up and I'm sitting there at my computer got my TV going, and I was like, oh no, because that was like 9 o'clock at night in California time, but it was midnight here. And I was like, well, we got the shift starts at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. What do we do? And so over the next couple of hours, we were able to get together and come up with a plan. But the funny thing was that our employees didn't know that plan, but 100% of them showed up for work at 6 a.m. And their group rationalization was, I'm not sure what this is about, but I know that my manager is going to be thinking about it. So let's just show up for work and let them tell us what we're supposed to do. And that was very heartening to see, especially since they're an essential business. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I haven't been in one of your factories. I mean, the workstations are far enough apart from each other that that's not an issue.
That's correct. That is correct. And to the extent there was any work, there were, yes, right. Our factory is pretty well separated, where one operator will be working with many machines over a pretty wide area. You know, you've got break rooms, and you've got meeting rooms, and you've got bathrooms, and you got to make sure you're covered there. And then also, to the extent your office cubes or desks are too close together, you got to make adjustments there.
Okay, so talk for a couple of minutes about leadership. I mean, I know you pride yourself as a leader. You've spoken to my EMBA class about leadership. How has the experience of the past 3 months changed you, changed your leadership style, changed what you do?
Well, it's I think the first thing I don't know to what extent I have succeeded, but here are some things that I'm trying to focus on. Patience, this virus and the COVID-19 disease sit in people's minds in different ways. They have, you've got parents who are deathly afraid of their children being infected. You've got grown children who are taking care of their parents who can't see their parents. You've got people that think it's a hoax. You got people that don't want people to tell them what to do. There's people that watch CNN, and there's people that watch Fox News, and they're listening to two different sets of stories, telling them two different sets of things. And so you just don't, everybody's coming from a different place. So you've got to be patient. You've just got to give everybody a pass. And then you have to ask for everybody to be patient and be a little bit kinder with each other, because you never know what's impacting folks, what they're bringing to work with them. So that's a big thing. The other thing that learned is that we have to communicate all the time. We always have to be telling our employees what we're doing, why we're doing it. So what we're doing, but also why are we doing this? Why do we want you to wear a mask? And then providing them useful information so that they can be informed as much as possible. So we spent a great deal of time in communication. And I think that was really important. The crisis management team structure was also really useful. I like that, where you have small teams meeting every day, sharing ideas, and then not spending a lot of time reporting to central headquarters, where because every minute they're spending giving you reports is more minutes they're not on the floor. And so we wanted to make sure all of our local leaders were on the floor talking to employees. How are you doing? How are things going? So constant communication was another very important one. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned too. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about now is what opportunities is this going to create for us? Because as a leader, you have to one, tell people how things really are. You can't BS them, but you should be talking to them all the time. You should be telling them that it's okay to be scared and worried. You can't say, don't be scared. It's fine.
Right.
You don't do that. But at the same time, with a company like YKK, we're going to come out on the other side of this thing for sure. We're going to be there. We're not loaded up with debt. We don't have those problems. So we get to come back. So how are we going to change and prepare now for when things turn, start to reshape and start rolling again? How are we going to take full advantage of this? And challenging people to think about what they're learning now in order to jump into the marketplace and be really active. We've always done stuff for PPE. Well, how can we get further into the medical industry? How can we take advantage of what we're learning and what people know what the customers need now, so we can be better providers of those things? So there's a lot of learning going on as well. So you want to really push people to learn. Also, there's no going back to normal, right? So there's this, I just saw a presentation that said, what are you going to do when getting back to normal? And my hope is we don't do that. Mm-hmm. My hope is we're better than that. We're looking at, we being a traditional manufacturer, perhaps we're a little behind on the work from home concepts. Well, this forced us into a work from home scenario. And you know what? Things aren't that bad. In fact, things can be better. So how can we give benefit to our employees to allow for more flexibility? So what are these lessons that we're learning now? And how can we make sure we challenge our old prejudices and assumptions so that we're better on in the next phase?
I've got a question for you from Jacobus Boers, who's a fellow, he's actually not a fellow, he's much better than I am, professor at the Robinson College of Business. And he asks the following, that YKK is early in the supply chain. So how do you expect supply chains to change post-COVID, both in your business and in general throughout the economy?
So, we're in a lot of different businesses or a lot of different industries. So the supply chains work in different ways. But I think that people have clearly found that the focus on single nation or focused nation supply chains is not a good idea. That you need to spread out your supply chains to find multiple sources. Now, what does that mean? Necessarily mean reshoring for U.S. businesses? In some cases, it might, like in the PPE industry. I think the United States might need to look at that in a real focused way to say, okay, we've got a strategic oil reserve, but we don't have a strategic medical reserve. Do we need to do a better job of building up our industry there for those types of crises? And I think, countries around the world will be looking at that. In apparel, a lot of apparel customers, saw some real shocks when everything stopped in China. So there'll be further, that's been pushed out into Asia more. But will apparel necessarily be reshored to the United States? No. I'll tell you one thing that's really interesting about supply chains in the automotive industry. I've been a big proponent of the U.S., Canada, Mexico, really all the Americas being a trading region. If we're going to compete globally, the United States is not going to compete by bringing all manufacturing back to the United States. There's certain aspects that are better suited for other countries, but in a region, we can become a regional bloc that's pretty powerful. And so when NAFTA was being challenged, I was explaining how that didn't work. It just doesn't work in the automotive industry. Cars don't get made that way. They get made across multiple borders in that supply chain. And we're seeing that now, right? Because the automotive workers in the United States want to open up, but they can't open up until Mexico opens up. And so we're seeing a lot of those conversations. So yes, we're going to see a lot of folks looking for diverse supply chains so they don't get stung the way they've been stung in the past. And I think in certain cases, we're going to see more manufacturing in the United States for emergency products. And I hope that we will see closer regional interaction for other supply chains as well. But it is interesting because we had orders. It'll also be it won't be like all of a sudden. It's, if you've ever watched a locomotive, full train stopping, you kind of see the local, the engine slowing down, and then you can hear those cars going boom, 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 boom. That's kind of the way the supply chain is operating, and it's going to be clunky, and it's not going to work really great for a while.
Okay, here's a question from Paul Pass. How do you work with YKK headquarters in Tokyo aligning corporate goals during this time of crisis?
Well, we set our business goals. We start working on our business goals. Usually, our fiscal year starts April 1. Our business goals are set on 4-year midterm plans. The next midterm starts April 1st, 2021. The work on that midterm started last fall. And we also work on annual budgets to fill out that 4-year midterm plan. Though that work starts usually in August, and it gets finalized in December and finally approved in January for an April 1st fiscal year. That's all been thrown out now. So we all have to start over again. So from a business standpoint, tomorrow we are resubmitting our plans for the rest of this year. But as far as operationally, like I was saying earlier, the best advice and the only real advice I received from Japan was there's really very little you can do to hurt this year any more than it's already hurt. So just do the best to take care of your employees as best you can.
So let's go back to the cycle of goodness.
Yeah.
How has all your experience over the past 10 weeks affected the way that you perceive, that you integrate, that you have internalized the cycle of goodness?
So a lot of times you don't, a lot of people get to make decisions that are either good decisions or bad decisions, right? There's either a good choice or a bad choice. And usually when decisions get up to my level, there's no good choices left. Everybody takes all the good choices when that happens. So sometimes you're left with like a bad choice and another bad choice. So you always rely on that cycle of goodness to tell you, all right, how are we doing the right thing? So it's just something you lean on as a true business tool, not necessarily just a principle that you do in case you're already meeting your budget numbers, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like that. It is the thing that has to drive you in all of your decisions when you don't have any good decisions to make. Now, sometimes what that means is you still have to run a business. I mean, you don't get to just run a charity. So that's part of the thing you have to understand is how do I make this a going concern? Understanding that that's really the driver of the economies, and charity is not necessarily the driver of the economy. The business, how do I make sure that we are operating fully in January of 2021 so that we can take advantage of all the opportunities and help our employees going forward?
I got a question here from someone on my staff. Wants to know, how do you start a meeting when you've got your 25 behaviors? I mean, do you actually, everybody pulls out the little, and reads it together and you spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes? I mean, every meeting this week, you're talking about the same behavior? I mean, how does that work in real life?
It's awesome. So we start, so the first slide of any agenda or any presentation is going to have the fundamental behavior of the week. And so whoever's running the meeting has the obligation to present that, which they do. And so we had a meeting this morning, we had a staff meeting this morning, and we talked about that. And I think we talked about that for like 11 minutes. And everybody had all these great, because we have somebody in the company do a write-up on what it means to them each week. And so the guy who wrote it, Tan Nguyen, who wrote the write-up this week, was really, really good, talking about how he was a refugee in the Vietnamese When the boat people of Vietnam, he was a kid on one of those boats, and how he didn't speak English. So that, of course, was a very rich topic, and we got to talk about that for a long time. And sometimes you go for 10 minutes, and you're like, okay, or 15 minutes, you're like, okay, we got to stop. We got to do this other stuff. Now, by the time Friday rolls around, maybe somebody just reads it, and everybody's like, can anybody say anything new about this? And people are like, no, we're done. Let's just move on. But yeah, no, you do it every time. And you know what? It changes the tenor. So we are not a religious company, but I think it would be, I have heard stories of executives who say, okay, let's start the meeting out with a prayer. And that changes the tenor of the meeting. I had a meeting with a large brand, apparel brand, and meeting with the CEO. And we were going to talk about Kenson Steel, which I'm sure you guys would love to hear all about.
You bet.
But he started the meeting. He had printed out an email. So that kind of dates him. He had printed out an email, and he had looked at underneath our signature line on our email. It says, embrace diversity. That was the fundamental behavior of the week. And he was just like, man, I really saw that. And it was like a signature line on an email, right? Nobody reads the signature line of an email, but he did. And it was underneath an even smaller font was embrace diversity. And he was like, I was really interested in what do you mean by that? Well, that was just an entree into the whole fundamental behaviors. And then all of a sudden, we were going to have a meeting talking about this. The meeting went totally in a different direction. Now we're partners. Now we're talking about something he's interested in. And the meeting, just deepened our relationship. So anybody who wants these fundamental behaviors, we don't copyright these, steal them, make your own. I strongly recommend. It's very much worth the effort. I think it's made everybody better across the board.
If I wanted to find the 25 behaviors, where would I find them?
They are on our website, and they are not copyrighted. So YKK, just do YKK North America, it's there. I'd be surprised I don't have it somewhere in profile. But yes, they are.
It is on your website.
Yeah. It's like YKK. Find out about YKK. I'm sorry, we have an intranet, and I spend most of my time there. And I can't.
I assure you, it's there. I was there this morning. So
okay, good. Yes, please.
It is definitely there. But these are YKK America fundamental behaviors, not YKK Global.
It's being adopted globally now.
So they're taking your idea and applying it corporation-wide.
That is correct. So Jessica Cork, our VP of Communications and Government Relations, and my predecessor, Alex Gregory, actually toured the globe last year, taking the fundamental behavior. Our global president loved it so much, he asked them to please go around the world and share it with everybody. And so different companies and different regions are picking it up now. So they're letting it be organic and let them choose their own, because it's important that you have it in your own voice. But yeah.
So YKK America's sounds more Japanese than the Japanese headquarters of YKK.
Well, it's funny because we've got, I grew up with Japanese colleagues and working with Japanese, and even before I went to work for YKK. And a lot of our non-Japanese employees grew up working for YKK. So yeah, to a certain extent, we grew up under the similar principles. And so yeah, we carry that on.
This is great. Jim, I want to thank you so much. Jim Reed, president of YKK America. Thank you for spending 45 minutes with us. This has just been terrific, learning about the cycle of goodness, learning about YKK and how you've taken those principles and you as a leader have applied them to the crisis that we are all experiencing.
Well, I leaned on them. I used them as a crutch when you don't really know what direction to go. And you say, oh, okay, well, this is do the right thing. Oh, okay, I get it. So it's sort of a crutch.
That is so cool. Thank you. I'm going to thank Jim. Tomorrow we've got Arlette Guthrie from the Home Depot. It's going to be terrific. She's a HR director within the Home Depot, talking about how the workforce is changing and how COVID is going to change what the workforce, the future is going to look like. That's at noon tomorrow. And then Thursday at noon, we've got Stacey Abrams is going to be speaking. So that's going to be terrific. It's for World Affairs Council members only, because we've got so many people interested in it. So if you're not a member of the World Affairs Council, please join before Thursday so you can participate and ask Stacey Abrams questions. Otherwise, we'll put the YouTube up, within 5-10 minutes of the time we end on Thursday. I want to once again thank the UPS Foundation and the Atlanta Global Studies Center for their support for this program today. And Jim Reed, once again, thank you. This has been terrific. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Everybody wash your hands. Stay socially distant. Stay home. It's not over. Please wear your mask. Put on some gloves. And if you don't feel well, stay home, please.
Good. Great advice.
I just keep saying it over and over again.
Yeah. Does it work on your kids?
Yeah. They're paying it. Yes. I'm surprised. If I'd have been a 17-year-old boy in this pandemic, I would not be behaving nearly as well. So hats off to those guys.
Good. Thanks again, Jim. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Ambassador.